Maria was sitting in the kitchen of her spacious two-story house, looking out the window with anticipation. Next to her, her 5-year-old son, Jared, played in a high chair. Maria was making salad for dinner, but she kept looking out into the yard. Her husband was about to arrive, so the young woman tried to finish cooking quickly so that she could go out to meet him. She knew it was better not to make Michael angry after work. He was often in a bad mood, and for some reason, he always took his anger out on her. They were both in their early 30s and married for almost 6 years, but they had never been truly happy. Michael was a successful entrepreneur who owned a chain of car dealerships. He was tall, handsome, and wealthy. The man knew his worth, and he was very careful about his environment. There were no random people around him. It was very surprising for Maria when, out of all the female employees in his office, he noticed her. Maria had just got a job in his company as a manager's assistant and couldn't even think about starting an affair with her boss. But something in her attracted the businessman so much that almost immediately after they met, he invited Maria to dinner and then offered her a real, serious relationship. Maria was flattered. Michael's feelings looked sincere, and besides, he wooed her in a very beautiful way. A basket of fresh flowers appeared on her desk every day, mostly roses of different types and colors. Michael was an experienced businessman, and he knew how to charm people, so it didn't take him long to charm a modest young girl who grew up in the province. She gave in to her feelings, and a tumultuous romance burst out between the young people, which soon brought the businessman and his bride to the altar. On the wedding day, Maria felt like the happiest girl in the world, and Michael, despite the displeasure of his parents, secretly swore before God and witnesses that he would take care of his beloved wife until his last breath. However, the idyll in their family didn't last long. 6 months later, the first quarrels began to erupt between the spouses. First, the businessman thought that his wife was being courted by almost half of the department where she worked, and then Michael began to suspect Maria in infidelity. Michael, seriously, I don't know how to explain to you that there is nothing between me and Paul. His wife almost sobbed. Why are you so damn jealous? His beautiful, dark gray eyes immediately darkened with rage. Jealousy was not just tormenting his heart, it was literally burning him from the inside, and the man could not help it. I will ask him. Don't doubt it, her husband said threateningly. And if it turns out that you flirted with him, or something worse, you will pay for that a very high price. Marie only sobbed and, running to her room, collapsed on her bed, pouring bitter tears. God only knew how tired she was of it all. There wasn't a single day without her husband having another scandal at home, and Maria didn't know how to convince him that she had never even thought of cheating on him. Eventually, the woman came to the conclusion that it was better for her to quit her job to avoid his constant attacks and suspicions. Michael was often away on long business trips, opening branches or new car dealerships in other cities. At first, after Maria quit her job, Michael finally began to trust his wife. He became caring, kind, and gentle again, and the woman could relax, no longer feeling the pressure of constant reproaches and suspicions. This period was the best in their relationship, and a couple of months later, Maria pleased her husband with the news that they were expecting a baby. Maria, sweetheart, I love you so much, he said, hugging her, while his wife was shyly holding the results of the medical examination in her hands. Michael glowed with happiness every day while Maria was carrying his son under her heart, and when she gave birth, her husband organized a big celebration for the three of them at home. When she and Jared arrived home from the hospital, Maria felt like she'd been in a fairy tale. There were colorful balloons everywhere. The table was set with fantastic desserts from the restaurant, specially made for them by the chef. Michael, this is so amazing, but it must be extremely expensive. It doesn't matter, her husband shook his head. You deserve it, Maria. You're the best wife in the world. Forgive me if I didn't notice it before. 4 years had passed, but their family life had not improved. A short period of joy lasted only a year or so, and then, alas, everything became the same as before. Michael began to suffer from jealousy again. Son became the only joy for a woman, and Maria was ready to do anything to raise her boy a decent man, not a tyrant like his father. That evening, when Maria was making dinner, her husband called her and told her in a harsh voice that he would be home very late. Go to bed without me, we'll talk in the morning." Worried by the harsh voice of her husband, Maria felt a strong anxiety. What happened? Why was he talking to her so strangely? After putting Jared to bed, the young mother tried to fall asleep herself, but she couldn't. After suffering from insomnia until the morning, Maria shuddered with a bad feeling when she heard her husband open the front door. A moment later, an angry Michael burst into the room. He stared angrily at his wife. "Michael, Jesus Christ, what happened?" the woman cried out in horror. The businessman shook his huge fist in front of Maria's face, holding his cell phone. "Someone sent me a message yesterday. A very interesting message," Michael said ominously, and added, "It clearly says that Jared is not my son. What would you say to that? Here, look, you're shameless." The woman didn't understand anything, shifting her gaze from her spouse to the phone and back again. Her heart was pounding in her chest so fast that Maria felt as if it were about to jump out. She was getting really scared. "What are you talking about? What message?" Maria inhaled the air with her nose and immediately recognized the monstrous odor of alcohol. "Are you drunk?" The businessman pretended not to hear the last question. He swung his hand menacingly at his wife, and Maria shrank back in horror. "You have no idea how much I want to hit you," he yelled. "Michael, stop it. Think about your son." "About my son," the businessman shouted and pulled his face so close to her that the woman almost vomited with fear. "So that's what I'm asking you about. Is Jared my son or not?" Maria felt her lips trembling. "Of course he's your son," she stammered. "How could you even think Jared is not your child?" Michael started pacing around the room while simultaneously bending his fingers. 1. I'm blonde, and Jared has dark hair. 2. My eyes are gray, and his are dark brown. So he doesn't look like me at all. How is that possible? Jared looks like your father. She tried to justify herself. You told me that, remember? Michael ran up to his wife again. I'm often away on business trips. Sometimes I haven't been home for weeks. The man's face twisted with anger. So while I was working, you were having fun with your lovers, and got pregnant by one of them. Maria was shaking with fear. She pulled together the remnants of her dignity and said quietly, You can think whatever you want, but Jared is your son. I have nothing more to say to you. Maria looked at her husband with eyes full of contempt, and it made the businessman furious. So you are not going to tell me the truth? Then get out of my house, and take your son with you. It felt as if something inside her had sharply broken off. She lost her balance and slowly slid down the wall. The woman didn't understand why her husband had such terrible suspicions of infidelity in his head, but she knew for sure she would not tolerate such behavior any longer. A couple of hours later, she was already standing at the bus station, buying tickets for her and Jared to her hometown. Maria struggled to hold back her tears as she and her child were literally left without a livelihood. Michael blocked her bank card as soon as she left the house, and the woman was left with only the money she had been carefully saving all this time. The reason why the woman didn't stay in the city was clear. The money she had wouldn't even be enough to rent a comfortable room, not to mention a whole apartment. Maria spent her childhood in the orphanage and always considered this time to be the darkest and most difficult in her life. Her peers didn't like her, for Maria always did her best to do well in school, and was too decent and too serious. Therefore, young Maria was constantly bullied by her peers, and in the last year before graduation, she literally counted the days until the moment when she could finally leave the walls of the orphanage she hated so much. When that day came, the state provided the girl with an old house on the outskirts of the town. Seeing it for the first time, Maria almost cried. Not only was the house small as a barn, but it looked like it was about to collapse. Rotten floorboards, moldering walls, and it seemed like the roof was about to collapse. These were the conditions in which the girl had to live. In the fall and winter, the wind penetrated through the huge gaps in the walls and windows, and Maria had to sleep in her outer clothes and 2 pairs of woolen socks. Soon, Maria decided that she needed to look for some affordable housing in the city because it was very difficult and expensive to get to work in the metropolis from the suburbs. There was only one bus on that route, and she had to wait on it for hours every day. Of course, this could not be an excuse for being constantly late to the office. So as soon as Maria got a job at Michael's company, She immediately started looking for an apartment in the city, and fortunately, she quickly found a suitable option. After the wedding, Maria moved into her husband's mansion, so her suburban home had long stood lonely and neglected. At some point, the roof and walls rotted so much that one autumn day it literally collapsed. There was no point in rebuilding it, so Michael suggested that Maria sell the land where the house was. Her husband decided to invest the money in his business, explaining that he was taking care of their family's well-being. Maria agreed at that time, but now she regretted it terribly. Having obeyed her husband's orders, she was left without a place to live. Maria and Jared wandered the streets for several hours, hoping to find a house or room for rent. Finally, they were lucky. A mother and son stopped near the local post office to get some rest on a bench, and Maria noticed an elderly woman in her 60s putting up a small advertisement on a bulletin board. She was renting out a room. "Excuse me." Maria approached her. "I see you're renting a room. My son and I need a place to stay." The woman turned around and looked intently at the businessman's wife and her child. "Well, if the price suits you, then move in. I see you and the boy are going to stay here for a long time." "How do you know?" Maria asked curiously. The elderly woman smiled kindly. "Oh, don't be so worried. I'm old enough, and I've learned to notice some things that tell me more about people than their words. Come on, let's go to my place. I'll show you the room and make you some hot tea. You must be tired after the long journey." Maria thanked her new friend, and taking her son by the hand, followed the woman. Her name was Hannah, and she was a very wise woman. She didn't ask Maria any questions, believing that she would tell her the reasons for her relocation if she wanted to. Over time, the women became friends and even tried to help each other with household chores, whether it was cooking or going to the store and pharmacy. They talked a lot in the evenings over a cup of tea, and Hannah, having learned the whole situation of her guest, sincerely sympathized with her. The elderly landlady treated Jared almost like her grandson. She had no children, and her husband had died 4 years ago. Maria and her son had become almost like family to the old woman, and Hannah was glad to have such wonderful people in her life. 6 months passed. During this time, the young mother managed to adapt to life in the suburbs, although it was not easy for her at first. Maria even managed to erase her villainous husband from her memory. For all these 6 months, he didn't bother to visit his wife and child. He didn't even call them once. The only thing he did was that he sent a message, asking for the address where Maria now lived. The businessman wanted to send her a notice of dissolution of marriage by post, and also warned her not to even try to claim a share of his money. "You are such a moron." Maria wrinkled the kitchen towel in rage. "Always thinking only about money. Don't worry, I don't need your millions." She was not going to humiliate herself and ask for child support. The young single mother decided that she could cope with everything on her own. Maria got a job at the local post office, and while she was at work, Hannah babysat her son. The old woman was happy to play with the boy, especially since Jared was always a very calm and obedient child. Once, the child had a strange rash on his body, and Maria decided to go with him to the city to the pediatrician. She took a day off and went to the bus station with her son, but she was a little late. The bus left without them. Trying to hitch a ride, the young woman went out on the highway. A dozen cars passed by Maria without even slowing down, and the young mother began to worry. What if they would be late for the doctor? Suddenly, the first sounds of thunder rumbled somewhere nearby, and a few minutes later a cold rain began to drip. Maria and her son hid under the roof of an old bus stop and waited for a car to pass on the deserted road. The next bus would arrive in 2 hours. The rain was getting heavier, threatening to turn into a real downpour, when a rich motorcade of 3 jeeps suddenly stopped near the young woman. The passenger door of the car in the middle opened wide, and someone called out to her insistently, "Get in, lady, I'll give you a ride. The downpour is about to start, and you're with a child." It was a female voice, and for some reason, it sounded very familiar to Maria. The young mother decided not to ignore the offer and hurried to get into the car herself, and then sat Jared down next to her. Only then, fastening her seatbelt, Maria turned her face to the owner of the car to thank her. At that moment, Maria froze. Her face turned white as if she'd seen a ghost in front of her. But that's exactly what happened. Little Jared was the first to notice the oddity. He shifted his eyes from his mother to the stranger's face, confused. "Mommy?" he asked Maria, and then turned to the owner of the car. "And here's Mommy, too." The owner of the motorcade didn't expect anything like this either. She looked the same as Maria when she could afford to wear expensive clothes and get her hair styled in premium beauty parlors. It was as if Maria was looking in the mirror at herself 6 months ago. They looked the same, like 2 drops of water. "Well," the rich girl said in a whisper, "I can't believe I'm seeing a copy of myself in front of me." "I'm shocked, too," Maria hesitantly replied with a smile. "I really have no idea what could that mean." "But what could that mean?" they said confidently. "It's pretty clear that you and I are twins. People don't look alike that much for nothing." Marie only shrugged her shoulders. She had no idea how it was possible. She was slightly relieved by the fact that the rich girl acted completely normal towards her, without any snobbery or a hint of arrogance in her voice and behavior. "Listen, why don't we go to a cafe? It's not far, my treat. We can talk about this weird situation." Marie agreed, informing the girl that she had to go to the hospital first. "That's okay, I'll wait for you near the hospital," Susan said. "I don't meet doppelgangers every day, so it's worth the wait." They came to a cozy cafe and ordered coffee. "I wonder how it happened that we were separated when we were babies." The rich lady was still puzzled. "My parents never told me that I had a sister. I don't know anything either," Maria answered. "I spent my childhood in an orphanage." The rich lady tapped her nail impatiently on the table and then said decisively, "You know what? Since my parents are no longer alive, I'll try to find out something from the local police, and I'll also hire a private detective." The women talked some more, and then agreed to meet at the same cafe in a couple of days. "Here, my phone number is on the back," Susan said, handing Maria her business card. "Call me even if you just want to talk. I'll always be glad to hear from you." Maria thanked her sister embarrassedly and took her business card. When they parted, the young mother was happy the whole day. She couldn't believe that she had met her blood sister accidentally. It meant that she was no longer alone in this life, and she had strong support from her family member. Everything seemed fine, but Susan never called Maria back, neither after 2 days nor after a week. Finally, Maria decided to take a risk and call her sister, but the phone was off. Not believing that Susan could play such a cruel joke on her, Maria felt uneasy, as if something bad had happened to her sister. She was shocked when her fears turned out to be true. 2 days later, Maria watched the local news on TV, reporting that the construction empire heiress had disappeared. Maria easily recognized Susan in the picture of the missing girl. "Please, if anyone has any information about my wife, call the number you see on your screens anytime." These words came from the mouth of a handsome young man, whose face clearly showed the bitterness and pain of loss. From the short caption, Maria learned that it was her sister's husband, Anthony. Maria was in a state of shock. How could it be? She had just found her sister, but she mysteriously disappeared. "No, I will not tolerate such a mockery from fate," Maria thought. "I will find out what happened to her." Without wasting a minute, the woman dialed Anthony's number and arranged a meeting with him, introducing herself as a close friend of his wife and saying that she had seen Susan just before she disappeared. Of course, Maria didn't mention that they looked exactly alike. They agreed to meet in the city park. Compared to the way he looked at the recent interview, now Anthony seemed much more nervous, which made Maria suspicious. "Hello," she said, addressing her sister's husband. "I've come to talk to you about Susan. Perhaps I can help you in some way." But Maria had not expected such a reaction from Anthony. Of course, he didn't know that his wife had a twin sister. The man instantly turned pale and staggered as if he were drunk. He raised his hand, pointed his finger at her, and said slowly, struggling to say every word, "No, it's impossible. You're dead. I mean, you're definitely supposed to be dead." "What?" Maria didn't understand and took only a couple steps towards the man, but it was enough for the man to shriek and immediately fall to the ground. "Stay back," he screamed hysterically at her. "You're not here. You can't be here." "No." His voice was breaking down into a shriek. Maria realized that Anthony was so shocked by the resemblance that it had somehow affected his mind, causing a short-term attack of madness. Being in a state of shock, the man involuntarily told Maria the whole truth. We went on a picnic. I deliberately chose such a deserted place, near a swamp. I tied you to a tree myself. You were drinking juice, remember? I put some strong sleeping pills in it, and then I tied you up. You couldn't survive. You just couldn't. Go away. Maria realized that Anthony had faked his wife's disappearance, leaving her somewhere in the swamp to be eaten by predators, calling the police and an ambulance. The young mother sat down on a bench. Her impressions of what she had heard were too strong. Anthony shouted in madness that he was only interested in the money of Susan's parents. When the police and paramedics arrived and found out what had happened, Anthony was immediately taken to the hospital and from there to the police station for interrogation. By that time, the man had almost come to his senses and told the police about the place where he had left his wife tied to a tree. Search parties immediately headed for the swamps, but when they reached the spot they found only cut ropes around the thick pine tree to which Maria's sister had been tied. "I'm afraid there's nothing we can do," one of the rescuers told Maria. Judging by the ropes, Susan managed to break free. However, there are swamps everywhere. She could have stumbled, bogged down, and drowned. Otherwise, we would have found her by now. But Maria didn't want to believe her sister was dead. She felt in her heart that Susan was alive. But in this case, there would surely have been traces of her near this place. Maria objected. The flattered grass, the low shrubbery would have been broken. It's unlikely. Nature regenerates quickly in these wildernesses. Besides, we don't know how long she stayed tied up. Maybe Susan broke free a couple of hours after her husband left, or maybe a couple days later. Eventually, the young woman decided to go looking for her sister herself, and after taking a few days off, she started searching the neighborhood. She still had hope that she would find her sister. Maria spent the next few days in search of her sister, and finally, she found the house of an old witch doctor, and according to rumors, she had recently rescued and was nursing some girl. The old woman opened the door and immediately realized that Maria was a relative of a sick lady. Letting Maria in, she walked her over to Susan, who was delirious on an old bed. "Here, I found her in the swamp," the old woman told her in a creaky voice. "She's got a fever." The old woman glanced at Susan. "It's a miracle she didn't die," the witch doctor added. "I gave her the potion, but she still can't calm down. She kept calling for some Anthony." Maria nodded understandingly. "Anthony is her husband. He's the reason she's in such a terrible situation." "Well, that's what I thought," the witch doctor answered. She mentioned Anthony in a very negative way. Maria gently shook the woman's dry, wrinkled hand. "Thank you. I'll take my sister back to the city right away." Once she was sure that Susan was okay, Maria exhaled with relief. Too many things had happened to her lately, and she needed some rest. When the paramedics transported the woman to the hospital, Maria began to visit her daily and take care of her sister. Maria was over the moon when her sister finally came to her senses. "Susan, thank goodness. I was so worried about you." "Maria, my dear, where am I?" Maria explained the whole situation to the girl. Susan nodded and said in a weak voice, "When I woke up, at first, I was screaming, calling for Anthony. I didn't understand what had happened to me and why I was tied to this damn tree." Susan wiped away the tears coming to her eyes. "Then I realized it was him. Maria, I was so cold. I was so scared. I spent the whole night there. I thought I would either die of fear or wild predators would come and eat me. And then, in the morning, I realized that I had an old pocket knife in my jacket. I used it to cut the ropes. But I was not myself. By that time, I guess the fever had finally conquered me because I don't even remember how I met that elderly woman. It's okay, sweetheart. It's all over now, and that jerk Anthony will be in jail for a very long time." Maria stroked her hair. "You're safe now. Get well and don't think about anything bad again." However, Susan took Maria's hand and said quietly but insistently, "We need to call a private detective. He said he found some information about us." Maria called the detective at the number her sister had dictated to her and waited anxiously for him to answer the phone. In fact, they both really wanted to know the whole truth about themselves. "So, girls, according to my information, both of you spent the first months of your lives in an orphanage," the detective told them. "Your biological mother, Veronica, came to the city with her fiancé Frank. They wanted to start a new life here, but Veronica met another man, even though she was pregnant. How could that be? Maria was upset, but she couldn't have put us in an orphanage, could she? She loved her fiancé, and they both wanted to have a baby, am I right? Alas, I don't know about that, the detective answered honestly. All I've been able to find out is that your mother died in childbirth because of severe bleeding. And there's no information about Frank, so you were left alone in the maternity hospital, to the mercy of fate. A hospital midwife took you to the local orphanage. There, Susan was adopted by a wealthy couple from the capital. She was about 6 months old at the time. Maria sighed heavily. She realized that she was simply unlucky. Unlike her sister, she had never been adopted, and Susan's parents probably didn't even know that she had a twin sister left in the orphanage. Well, I guess that's my fate, Maria uttered with a sad smile, and then they said goodbye to the detective. The main thing is that we found each other after all these years. That's a real miracle. Yes, Susan agreed. Now I'm not going to leave you alone. The girl said, you and my little nephew, I'll never lose you again. We'll keep in touch and visit each other. You and Jared are the only close people I have left after my parents died. I'm going to divorce Anthony as soon as possible. Let him think about his life in jail. Maria smiled through tears of happiness and warmly embraced her sister, whom she found after almost 20 years. After Susan finally recovered, she suggested Maria move to the city with her son. Seriously, Maria, why are you and Jared living in the middle of nowhere? Move to the city. I'll help you to find a good apartment and a normal job. I have a few ateliers in the city, and I really need a good, intelligent manager who can handle such a responsible job better than my sister. Susan winked cheerfully at Maria, hinting that she would help her sister to get into the family business as quickly as possible. The businesswoman really wanted Maria to be her assistant. She knew that before marrying Michael, Maria had been a top-notch professional in her field. Thank you, Susan, Maria said after a short pause, but I think I'm going to refuse. I am immensely grateful for your help, but, the sister asked impatiently, raising her eyebrows. You know, I depended on Michael for so long that I'd forgotten what it was like to control my own life. Jared and I live in the middle of nowhere, but I finally feel like I can control my own life for the first time in a while. I need to do everything on my own, you know. Susan was upset at her sister's refusal, but she understood her feelings. Susan didn't like it when people said she'd built her business solely on her father's money. Well, all right, but may I at least help you financially? I just feel bad for you. My sister and my nephew have to live in someone else's house with a leaky roof. Let me at least build you a new house. Susan, don't worry. Maria laughed. Jared and I have everything we need. Seriously. In response, Susan only shook her head. You're so stubborn, Maria. At least promise me that if you need anything you will call me right away, whether it's money or anything else. Just remember that I'm always here to support you and do whatever is necessary for you and Jared to live a peaceful and comfortable life. Maria assured her that if things got really bad for her and her son, she would definitely tell Susan about it, but for now, she was just happy to be friends and see her sister. After this conversation, the women hugged each other tightly, and Susan went back to the city. Several months passed. It was autumn and the nights were getting increasingly cold. Maria and her son were still living at Hannah's house and were quite happy with the way their lives had changed. Maria was now friends with Susan, and the sisters really enjoyed each other's company. Of course, Maria was a little upset after learning the truth about their mother, but she tried not to pay too much attention to it. After all, she couldn't fix anything, and soon something happened that completely changed Maria's life. It all started on a rainy evening when suddenly someone knocked insistently on Hannah's door. The elderly landlady and Maria were having tea at this time, and they were not expecting anyone. Who could it be late at night? Hannah asked anxiously and looked at the front door. I'll open it if you don't mind, Maria offered. Maybe someone needs help. There's a highway nearby. Anything could happen. When Maria opened the door, she was surprised to see a tall, broad-shouldered man, covered with mud from head to toe. The stranger looked at Maria with a guilty smile. I apologize, he began. I know it's very late now, but I just don't have anyone else to turn to. What happened? Hannah asked as she approached them. Hello, he greeted the landlady. My car is in the driveway, stuck in the mud. My phone died, as luck would have it, and I'm left without a connection. Could I use your phone to call for a tow truck again? I apologize for bothering you so late. Well, come in. Hannah nodded to him. And Maria will make some hot tea for you, right, Maria? They invited their guest to the table and served him hot, herbal tea, and then he introduced himself as Leo. As it turned out, the man came to such a remote place to visit his elderly father, who was left all alone after the death of his wife. He is still healthy, the man proudly told about his father, but still, from time to time, he has some health problems, and he absolutely refuses to move to the city. The man smiled slightly at Maria, and she felt her heart tremble at that kind and pure smile. So I visit him when I have time and energy. I work as a driver, Leo added, taking a big sip of tea. Hannah glanced at Maria and then, unexpectedly asked the young driver, "How do your wife and children tolerate your long trips?" At that moment, both women saw a gloomy shadow run across their guest's face. "Well," Leo replied after a pause, "my wife passed away 5 years ago." Leo crossed himself 3 times. "What can I say? I miss her very much, and we never had time to have children. She died in the 2nd year of marriage." "I'm sorry, Leo, I'm so sorry," Maria said. "We shouldn't have asked about it, it was so tactless." "It's all right, you didn't know," the man said calmly. Meanwhile, the rain outside had turned into a heavy downpour, and Maria, looking out of the window, only said, "You can't drive anywhere in a downpour like this." "You know what, Leo, stay at our place tonight." Could Maria have guessed that after staying at their house for 1 night, Leo would end up staying for a whole week? The next morning, when the downpour was over, the man called for help and visited his father, as he had intended. However, after that, Leo returned to Hannah's house, already in his small car, which the tow truck pulled out of the deep hole. The driver asked Maria's permission to help her with the household chores, and in a couple of days, he repaired her fence, made some new vegetable beds, and even fixed a small hole in the roof, through which a lot of water was getting into their house all the time. "Thank you so much, Leo," the woman said to the driver. "We wouldn't have fixed the roof without your help." "That's okay. To be honest, Maria, I like it so much here I'd even think about moving to this town, closer to my father. It's so quiet and peaceful here. The air is clean, and there's a river nearby." Maria felt embarrassed. Leo looked so warmly at the woman that it was impossible not to notice his affection for her. Maria realized that clean air and river were not the only reasons why Leo suddenly decided to stay. During that week, he and Maria had become more than just friends. They felt a mental connection. Jared also liked their new friend, and for a young single mother, that was also very important. When Leo saw Maria for the first time, he immediately realized that she was meant to be his wife. He had not met such a sweet, kind-hearted, and honest woman since his first marriage. And to tell the truth, he had been dreaming of children for a long time. The man became very attached to Maria's son, Jared, and he had no doubt he would be able to raise him as if he were his own son. "Maria," Leo asked her with a smile, "would you like to come downtown with me tomorrow night? Maybe we could go to some cozy cafe." Maria, whose heart raced, only smiled broadly in response. "You know, it's been 1,000 years since I've been to a cafe. I'd love to accompany you, Leo." The driver slowly walked up to Maria and, looking straight into her eyes, gently took the woman's hand. 3 years flew by unnoticed. Maria's life had changed dramatically during this time, but one day, on a dark summer night, her past suddenly knocked on her door. "I'm coming," Maria uttered in a sleepy voice, getting out of bed. "Who's there?" she asked warily, but there was no answer. Then, Maria looked out the window and froze. Michael, her ex-husband, was standing on the porch, looking around like a beaten dog. What a surprise, Maria thought ironically. It's been so many years, and he finally decided to visit me. Maria noticed that her ex-husband was wearing simple, inexpensive clothes, pants, and a shirt with short sleeves. No luxury suits and polished shoes. "Maria, hello, forgive me, please. I have nowhere to go right now. Can you let me in for a minute?" Michael asked pleadingly. Maria looked at him sternly, but then calmed down. No matter what happened, she would never do something as cruel to him as he had done to her. "Come in," she said quickly, and a little later, when Michael was already inside, she added, "You're lucky my husband isn't home, but he'll be back tomorrow afternoon." "Husband?" Michael asked loudly, and only then noticed Maria's rounded belly. The former businessman pressed his lips together and involuntarily grimaced. "Shh, Jared's already asleep," the woman whispered back to him, then raised her eyebrows expressively. "Yes, husband. Why are you looking at me like that? Did you think I wouldn't have a personal life after you? You kicked me out on the street with a child, and now you indignant." "No, Maria, of course not." The man turned gloomy and sat down in the hallway. "May I ask you for a cup of tea? I'm very tired after the long trip." Maria looked out into the street but didn't see her husband's car. "Did you come here by bus?" she asked in surprise. "By cab," her ex-husband corrected her. "I've had so much going on in my life lately." Michael said that 2 years ago a real tragedy happened in his family. His mother and father got into a terrible hurricane when they were returning from celebrating their wedding anniversary. A tree fell directly on their car and completely crushed the front part. His father immediately died, and his mother was left paralyzed for the rest of her life. "You have no idea how terrible it is when you lose loved ones," Michael sobbed. Maria gently touched his arm and looked her ex-husband straight in the eyes. "Believe me, Michael, I know this feeling very well." Michael immediately shut up, realizing that she was referring to him and their marriage. However, in the next second, he hurriedly muttered, "You know, Maria, only 6 months ago my mom confessed to me that she was the one who sent that damn text message back then, the one that caused you and me to break up. It turns out that all this time she was planning another bride for me, from a powerful and rich family. So she thought it would be better for you and me to break up." Maria answered nothing to this, only shrugged her shoulders. "You have made your own choice," she finally said. "You can't change anything now." All the pain and bitterness that she had tried to forget for so many years, erasing the memories of her hated husband, immediately flashed before Maria's eyes. "I was so wrong, you know. I married that girl later, but she turned out to be such a bad. When my business had problems, she filed for divorce, and you're completely different, sweetheart." "That's enough, Michael." Maria interrupted his speech. "Tell me why you're here and leave. I don't want Jared to see you. He has a different father now, a real one." Michael looked miserably at Maria and then at her belly. She was about 8 months pregnant. "I don't have a business anymore, Maria," the ex-husband muttered, almost crying. "I'm just like you now, an ordinary person. So I thought, why don't we start a new life together?" Maria was so shocked by what she heard that she thought she had misheard. Was he really suggesting that she go back to him again? "Michael, I understand you're very stressed now. That's probably why you can't control what you say. But isn't it funny to you? Did you hear what I said? I'm married, Michael, and I'm very happy. In case you're wondering, we're expecting twins. I don't want to be with you, and I can't be with you. I'm sorry to be so frank, but I would never go back to you even if someone offered me $1 million for that. You're a cowardly and mean-spirited man, Michael, and fate has punished you for your indifference." Michael, listening to his ex-wife, cried and shook his head in agreement. "Maria, you are right about everything. But what should I do now? I don't have anyone, and my parents can't help me anymore. But what do you want from me? I won't give you my son. Don't even dream about it. You kicked him out yourself, remember? And I don't have the money to invest in your business. Forgive me, Maria." Michael collapsed at her feet. "Will you let me stay at your place, at least until morning, to get my thoughts together?" Maria took a deep breath, feeling the twins pushing inside her. In that second, the woman involuntarily thought of Susan. The sisters were very close now, but Maria would never dare ask her to help this jerk. All she could give him now was just her sympathy. "Okay, you can stay until morning, but then leave. There's nothing between us anymore, Michael. I don't love you, and I won't give you a second chance." Michael wrapped his arms around his ex-wife's legs and sobbed for a long time before she was finally able to push him away. The next morning, he silently got up and ordered a cab back to the city. Looking at Maria one last time and thinking what his life could have been like, Michael smiled sadly to himself and got into the car. "Goodbye," Maria whispered to him silently. Now she was finally able to let go of her past, spread her wings, and fly into a bright future. A few hours later, a familiar car drove up to a large two-story house. Susan had given the newlyweds this beautiful house as a wedding gift. Maria had not expected such a rich and generous gift from her sister, although Susan had hinted a month before the wedding that she would not allow her and her husband to live in the old house. "Maria, my love, I'm back," Leo shouted cheerfully to her, smiling and opening his arms to his wife. Maria instantly found herself in his arms and kissed her husband gently on the cheek. "How are you doing? Missed me, I hope?" he asked with a smile. "Your face is so pale today. Did you cry? Something happened? Did someone hurt you?" Marie only shook her head negatively and spoke, snuggling happily against her beloved. "No, Leo, of course not. Who can hurt me now that the best man in the world is by my side? You are my heart, my love,